Today on the Pro Talk podcast, we're going to learn a few business lessons from an amazing entrepreneur. And we're also going to find out what they really teach at the Harvard Business School. But before we introduce today's guests, remember to push that subscription button and that little notification bell. That way you never miss a conversation with another amazing professional. So today we get to talk to a fantastic guy. He's a businessman, entrepreneur, great father. Starting out, let's get right to where he started out as a Division I college tennis player. If you play any Division I sport, you know that takes most of your time. So what did this guy do? All he did was major in business and graduate summa cum laude from the University of Colorado with a degree in business. After graduating, he worked 2 years as an analyst at a management consulting firm called McKinsey & Company. After 2 years as an analyst, he went to graduate school. Where? None other than the Harvard Business School. After Harvard, he went back to McKinsey for several years, and I think he worked, his official title was a consultant. We'll find out here in just a second. After McKinsey, he went to work at the Home Depot, where he helped start their strategic planning group and helped launch their early e-commerce days, e-commerce efforts, I should say. 8 years later, he decided he wanted to start his own business. He ran a bunch of home remodeling franchises. And then in 2007, he sold that business and they went to work at Red Ventures. At Red Ventures, he held a variety of different roles across a variety of different functions, which led to the role as Chief Operating Officer. And then in 2023, he decided to retire. And when you meet this guy, you're going to realize he's pretty young to retire. So he joins us here in the Pro Talk podcast, and I'm honored and thrilled to bring you none other than Mr. Tim Kulick. Tim, appreciate you joining us today. How you doing?
Hey, Rob. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. It's great to be here.
Well, we're glad you're here, and I know your background, your resume is very impressive. But what part of the country did you grow up? Did you grow up in the Midwest?
Yeah. So I grew up in the Midwest, elementary school, high school. My roots at a suburb of outside of Chicago called Libertyville, so kind of a northwest suburb until I went to school. But that's kind of where my roots are.
What was the first sport that you played? Did you grow up with a little tennis racket in your hand like some of these guys or what?
Well, I played a bunch of sports. My parents kind of tried to introduce me to a bunch of different things, some of which I liked, some I didn't. Tennis was one of those things at an early age that my dad got me involved with. We had a tennis club down the street and got me in some lessons once a week. That's kind of how I started. But I liked it, but I played soccer, which I didn't like so much. It was a ton of running and it hurt my knees. And I played baseball, and I was probably the best at baseball of all the sports, a little bit of football as well. But ultimately, I kind of had a group of friends that played tennis, and we would hang out at the tennis club. And I spent a summer there and had some success in some tournaments, and it was just a lot of fun hanging out with a group of people that I liked, and that's kind of the way it went. And ultimately, focused on went the tennis route.
What age were you when you started playing tournaments? Or was it just like a random one here and there?
Well, it was kind of an interclub thing to start. I didn't really get involved in playing in kind of the USTA tournaments until I was probably 12. But when I was 10 and 11, during the summers, we would play these interclub things with against other clubs. It's kind of a stepping stone to get to the USTA tournaments, which were tougher. And so I just thought it was a lot of fun to be a part of a team and play tennis with your friends and compete and keep getting better.
I didn't know that you played baseball. What was your position as a baseball player?
I played third base and pitched. And yeah, I really enjoyed baseball. My dad played baseball more than tennis growing up. And so he kind of nudged me to go the baseball route in high school. The seasons for tennis and baseball were both the spring. So I kind of had to make a decision in high school whether I wanted to play tennis or whether I wanted to play baseball. And anyway, I really like tennis, and I think I kind of let my dad down because he wanted me to play baseball. But at any rate, it's worked out well for me.
Well, I guess they say that you chose a life sport. It's not like you can call 18 friends, go play pickup baseball right now.
Yeah, that certainly wasn't what was in my mind at the time, but it's definitely worked out that great. I have some of my best friends still to this day are my tennis buddies, and I play just about every day, and I get not only the thrill of scratching the competitive itch through tennis, but also a great social network of friends that's mm, I'm very fortunate to have. So it's been a wonderful sport for me, and a fortunate choice that I made a long time ago when that was the last thing on my mind. So
Yeah, that's great. Of course, I'm a little biased towards that tennis angle, but I think it's huge for kids to play team sports. And so you had, I would say, the best of both worlds. You played at some team sports and then you chose your individual sport. I think that's great.
yeah, absolutely.
What can you remember back as a kid, whether individual or a team? What was your biggest victory as a kid?
Hmm. Gosh, I mean, there are a few that stand out. I can remember, I remember one playing Little League baseball. Gosh, I don't know. I must have been 12 or 13 at the time. And our team was the Tigers, I remember. And we were kind of in the hunt to win the Little League championships in Libertyville for our age division. And we were playing the team that was undefeated, and we had lost, I think, maybe 2 games or something like that. And anyway, we ended up winning that game with a home run um, at the bottom of the last inning of the game, and ended up beating the Little League champs, or the number one team. So that was one I'll never ever forget.
Who hit
On
the
the
home
tennis
run?
court, what's that?
Who hit the home run?
I did.
You did?
I did. Yeah, I did. That was the only one I hit ever in Little League, and it was that game. So I
Walk
think
it
that's
off.
part of the reason why I remember it too. And turns out it was a guy. It was a guy who was also, his name was Joe Spellman, if I remember right. And it turns out he was in the same. His family played tennis as well, and he was in the tennis summer camp thing that I was in as well that summer. So we showed up, we played the baseball game, and then I think the next week or 2 weeks later, the tennis camp started, and Joe was there. So we actually got to be good friends after that. He was pitching, and I was the one that I hit the home run off of him. So, but
When's
we
the last
became.
time you spoke to him?
Oh gosh, I lost touch with him
Okay.
uh, in high school a long time ago. It'd be really fun to catch up with him now and talk about that. So anyway, that was one fun memory from my childhood.
Did you feel the connection with the bat for about a week after you hit that home run?
Oh yeah, I mean, my gosh, there's nothing like hitting a home run when you're in Little League. Over the fence. It wasn't the in the park thing where you run around fast and everybody makes mistakes. So it
Seven
was over
errors,
the
right?
fence, and yeah, I think my dad had to tell me to continue to run the bases because I was jumping up and down so much, on first base when I saw it go over the fence.
Yeah. Did you get to keep the ball?
Oh gosh, I don't think so. I don't remember what happened with the ball.
I have to look in Cooperstown somewhere, I guess. Huh? That's awesome, man. A walk off. Nice. Well, I got to ask you, with every great thing, there's something bad. What do you remember your worst defeat, either as a tennis player or a team sport as a kid?
Oh gosh, there are a lot of those. Those there are uh, a lot of memories of opportunities lost, chances blown. Yeah, I remember I was playing in a junior tennis tournament. I was probably maybe in the 14s or 16, something like that. It was in Rockford, Illinois, so not too far, maybe an hour and a half from where I lived at the time. And I remember I was seated in this tournament, and I was up. It might have been 6050, but it was something 6051, something like that. And I ended up losing the match, and I just gagged. I just totally fell apart. my parents were there watching. We had made like a family trip to go to Rockford. I can't remember what else was in Rockford that was worth going to see, but I remember we were all together. And, so I just absolutely fell apart in this match and lost it. And, I remember my parents, like, they didn't even know what to say. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't, I just wanted to go back home. I didn't want to hang out in Rockford. So, I remember that, to this day. And, that's just the way it is. I mean, sometimes you see it at the pro level where, you got things firmly in control and it unravels. And it's one of those, life kind of lessons that you try to take a look back on and see what you did wrong and what happened and, you know, learn from it and move on. But, yeah, there are plenty of those for sure. And that's a great thing about sports. It's a game. It doesn't mean anything. Sports at that age is meant to teach you how to deal with those situations, both the wins and how do you deal with winning and losing and how do you deal with that and bouncing back and constantly getting better. So, it was a learning experience, like every time you lose or things don't go your way.
Now, do you remember as a kid if you got trophies for anything other than first place?
No, no, not then.
No?
Not then. Yeah. I mean, if you weren't first, you didn't get a trophy. And yeah, there were no participation medals back then. So getting the trophy meant something for sure. Um, yeah, it's different now. Our kids have trophies for everything, for just showing
Playing,
up, which I life doesn't work like that. You don't get a trophy for just showing up
showing up, right?
to things. You get rewarded for hard work and having an impact and going above and beyond. And, so I don't think that the culture we've created around sports and just, giving awards for participation is all that healthy for our kids these days.
Yeah, I agree. So what age did you think or decide, or did your parents give you a nudge? What point did you realize that you thought you could play tennis in college? And how did you arrive at Colorado?
Yeah, I had in high school, um, I had hoped that I would get good enough to be able to play in college. And I was never that great in juniors. I had an injury. Well, it was more of a medical issue. I had a problem with my back, where I had to have back surgery. My junior year in high school, which is kind of a critical year for recruiting, college for freshman year in college. So I couldn't play because I had a back surgery. And so I didn't really have a ranking. I didn't play in any of the national tournaments. I was not on anybody's radar screen. So I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to play college tennis, but I really wanted to. I really wanted to go to a school where I had a chance to play. Um, and, I wanted to go to a bigger school. I wanted to go to a Division I school. And, so I pretty much thought I could play. I talked to coaches. Some said, there's no way you'll make the team. Some said, great, love to have you. You can come and walk on and try out. And can't guarantee anything, but you'll have to, come in and we'll see how it goes. Love to give you a shot, but nothing's guaranteed. And that was pretty much the extent. I had no offers. I had no firm commitments or offers from anywhere. And so there were a few schools where the coaches said, hey, come on and try out. And here's kind of the process for how it works for walk-ons at our school. And, would love to have you participate in that and see what happens. So at any rate, there were a few schools that I got into that I was interested in, went and visited them, met with the team, watched a practice, met the coaches in person and stuff. And Colorado felt like it was a good fit. They had a good team, but not a great team. And the guys, they were all super welcoming, took me in, made me feel like a part of a team from day one. And the coach was a wonderful, wonderful guy as well. So, that's where I felt like I fit. Was fortunate enough, worked really hard the summer before going to school there, worked my way back into shape, Had a really good win that summer before going off to school in a tournament. Had beaten a guy that was you know highly ranked and went on to play at Georgia. So I had a really good win that summer. And anyway, was playing good tennis when I got on campus, and made it through the process, and ultimately my freshman year got a chance to play a couple of matches. So it worked out great, but it was a lot of hard work and a big bet. And I'm thankful that the coach there, Coach Weingartner at the time, gave me the opportunity, because it was life changing for me. I don't know that I'd still be playing tennis today if I didn't have a chance to play college tennis there. So, worked hard, created my own luck, and good things happen from there.
You mentioned that looking back, you mentioned that you had a back injury. Do you think you would have worked as hard as a senior if you had not have had the back injury?
It's hard to say. I knew I was behind. I knew that, I mean, I'd heard it from every coach that I had talked to, that, I was going to have to prove myself. So, I do think that was a motivator. I knew I was behind. I knew I hadn't been playing, and I was out of shape from not having been able to play for a while. So, I was definitely very motivated to give it my best. So I worked really, really hard that summer, played as many tournaments as I could get into, and worked with a couple of different coaches on different parts of my game and tried to get back in shape. And so, yeah, I do think it was motivating. If I had been playing and I had been hearing the same things from coaches, I'm sure I would have worked just as hard. But, if I had results my junior year, I don't know what I would have heard, if it might have been
Yeah.
different. But
Well, you took that adversity and turned it into a good thing. That's great. Now, do you have a favorite coach of all time? Is it a high school coach or college coach?
well, I they picked up different things from each of them. So, I was fortunate to have a lot of good people giving me guidance and helping me along, and other players that were older than me. Other players on the high school teams that were helpful, guys in college when I was a freshman, some of the more experienced guys there that I played on the team with, played doubles with, were very helpful in pointing things out. Some were good technically with, how do you the mechanics of different shots. Some were, really good about shot selection. Some were really good about just the mindset to be in certain points in a match. So, I think I picked up some really good insights from all of them. I don't know that there's one that stands out that's that was just head and shoulders above all the others, but I got something out of all of them.
Well, that's good that you got something from everybody. Let me ask you this. So, in college, it's a kind of a two-part question. If you remember your worst defeat, most painful defeat, and how did you move on from it?
Yeah. I think probably the toughest loss I had was in the conference championship. It was my junior year, and I was playing a guy from Kansas who was a fantastic player. And, I wasn't supposed to beat him. I was definitely the underdog, but I was playing really, really well. My parents had come out to watch as well. So I had my parents in the stands. And, we had a fantastic match. It was a battle. And, I won the first set. I lost the second set. I was down in the third. I battled back and ultimately lost the match close in the third set. It was one of those matches where all the other players had finished. Ours was going on for so long, and the stands were full. And it was a lot of drama, super tight, super close, high level. So, people were watching, and the fans and teammates were really getting into it. Players from other teams were watching the match. So it was pretty visible. And even though I played really well, the guy just played better than me on a couple of points, and that was it. And it would have been a huge, huge, huge win for me, and winning a conference championship, would have been really fantastic. Um, but it didn't go my way that day. So it was tough. It was the end of the season for me, so I didn't have to carry that loss to the next match. It was the end of the year for me, but it pointed out some things that I needed to work on, some parts of my game that had I been a little better on, I think would have pushed me over the edge, and it helped me for my senior year for sure. So again, it's like everything. You learn as much, if not more, from your losses than you do from your wins. And that was definitely one of them.
Were there any words of encouragement from your coach or your parents or other teammates after something painful like that?
Yeah, I don't remember the specifics. I know my parents I were just they were proud. I remember, my mom saying she'd never seen me play that well before. Just, to her, that's all that mattered was just watching her son compete and at a level like that. So that made me feel good that she felt pride, even though I had lost. Your coach, his name was Ron Smar. Um, he knew I left it all out there, that I gave it everything I had, that I was, 110%, and it just didn't go my way. So, I think he was pleased, impressed, and what else can you say? I mean, just didn't go your way. Could have gone either way, but it didn't. And I think he saw in me that I had a lot of fight, and you know, he learned something more about me then too, which helped me senior year.
Right. Well, this isn't all humdrum, mopey lopey trying to dig up your painful past. But I think we learned, like you've mentioned, we learned so much from our losses. And, um, you know, moving on from your tennis career at Colorado, you're a business major. What was your toughest class in your business background?
Yeah. Before we move on from tennis, just one thing to say. Um, our team wasn't that great. We had more fun than wins, and I lost more matches than I won throughout my college career. But again, I learned an awful lot from that experience about just dealing with adversity and putting things behind you and moving on. So it was a great experience all the way around. So translating that into the classroom, your question was, what was the toughest class I had to deal with?
Yeah. Yeah. What was your hardest class that you had?
Yeah. Um, I found many of the engineering classes that I took my freshman year, to be really challenging. Some of the calculus courses that you had to take. Um, I was not I was not the best student in high school. Um, I didn't really put forth the effort in high school. I had a lot of distractions. I was interested in other things. I was not the best student. Um, so I'm glad they let me into college, honestly. And I thought I didn't know what to expect in college. I thought, gosh, here I am, just kind of an average student, and here are all these smart people going to college, and it's college, and I better get my act together in a hurry. So, I traveled across the country, 18 hours from home, and college was expensive. I didn't want to waste my parents' money, and I thought I better not, I better make the most of this. I better not fail out. And so, I worked really, really, really hard at it. I wanted to make the tennis team too. I didn't want to, be on academic probation. Like I said, I had nothing to compare it to. I wasn't calibrated in terms of how easy or hard it was going to be, to get the grades to stay in school. So I worked hard, but yeah, I think, some of the engineering classes, the calculus, the physics classes were particularly challenging. They moved pretty quickly through the material, and, I had to work hard to keep up. But after the first test or two, my freshman year, I got A's on those tests, and I thought, wow, that's, I can do this. I mean, if I put forth the effort, even though it's hard, I can do this. I can figure it out. And, then not just my first tests, my goal was to pass, not fail out. And, ended up getting A's you know, on, on those tests in the toughest classes. And then, My second test was, well, I want to get an A on this too. I want to, I got an A on the first one. Let's keep it going. So I worked hard, and that was the goal, the motivation. Um, and then, that turned into, you know, I want to get an A in the class, and I want to get an A in every class. And, then I want to be the top in the class, as I progressed throughout my college career. So I built a lot of confidence through successes and hard work and studying hard, and, ultimately kept setting the bar higher for myself every step along the way. And, just kept it going.
So a high achiever, taste success, success breeds success. That's awesome.
Not starting out for sure, definitely not a high achiever in school, but in a high school, but you know, I realized that I could do it, and if I put forth the effort and focused on it. So
Which translated to first job. And now what everybody wants to find out, especially if they have kids, is how does one get into the Harvard Business School? Couple A's in the engineering class at Colorado, is that enough or what?
no, definitely not. I still don't know why I got in, honestly, but my path in getting there was also, I think, kind of an interesting story, which was a combination of luck and hard work. So I went through school at Colorado, and I did really well. Graduated, almost at the top of my class while I was playing Division I college tennis, which was demanding on my time. So it required a lot of effort and focus and discipline. But when I graduated from school, I really wanted to stay out in the Denver area. I really liked Colorado. My parents had moved away from Chicago, where I grew up, so I didn't really want to go back there, because my family had moved on. So I kind of wanted to stay in the Denver area, but it was at a time when the economy was just not good. It was in a recession. And so there were not a lot of companies hiring. There weren't jobs that were really interesting to me there. So I stuck around the summer after I graduated and taught tennis at our coach's tennis camp. And it turns out one of the kids at the camp, his father was out there. They lived in the Midwest in Cleveland, and he was a Colorado graduate that brought his son out to be at the tennis camp for the week. And so his son was on my court. So I got to know his dad a little bit outside of, after the camps were over, and chat with his father for a bit. And his father had talked to my coach, and who had, said some good things about me, and said, well, gosh, what are you interested in doing? And I, kind of told him what my background was and I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I told him, willing to work hard, and, want to do something in the business world, and willing to do whatever to get my foot in the door. And anyway, he was a consultant at McKinsey, and I didn't know what consulting was. It sounded really neat, sounded like a great opportunity, a great company. And, anyway, he interviewed me, and then felt comfortable enough to pass me on to his colleagues and kind of get my foot in the door in the interviewing process at McKinsey. And, I remember they flew me out to their Cleveland office where this guy was based. And, I remember it was a full day of interviews. I had like 8 interviews with people, and they were all looking at me like, who is this? Are we really interviewing a tennis pro for one of our analyst positions? And they had never hired anyone for this role, for this entry-level analyst role, outside of an Ivy League school. So here they're interviewing this guy from Colorado who's, you know, tan from teaching tennis, and like, what is happening here? Is this some sort of a, reality TV show prank or something like that? So anyway, I ended up getting an offer and moved to the Midwest. I was based out of the Pittsburgh office. And, again, it was the same kind of experience I had in college. Like, holy cow, these are super, super smart people. They're all Ivy League people. They've all got MBAs from these great schools. And, my gosh, I got to step it up. I had a little bit of imposter syndrome. And, the other analyst in the office was, a guy who graduated from Princeton, and had done all these amazing things. And so I felt like I had to work really hard to, to compete, and be at his level. At any rate, I worked hard. I had a great experience there. Um, impressed some folks enough where they were willing to, write letters of recommendation for me to go to, to apply to some of the top business schools, and ultimately got into Harvard. So I think it was a combination of luck that got me that job because I was introduced to this guy on the tennis
Right.
court, and then, worked hard through the interview process and through my couple of years there, and ultimately impressed enough people to, to apply to Harvard and get in. So
Well, you got in and then you proved yourself.
yeah, I guess so. Or trick them. I don't know.
So you was that 2 years? Is that how long it takes to get out of Harvard Business School generally?
Yeah, the full-time program there is a 2-year program. That's right.
And then you go back to McKinsey as a consultant. And that I've always wanted to ask you, what does a consultant do?
Yeah,
In
good question.
yeah,
There's there are a variety of different kinds of consulting firms. Some specialize in working with the top senior management of typically larger companies. And you're typically helping them solve some of their biggest strategic questions. Should they get into this business, and if so, how? Should they restructure the company? Should they exit this business? What should the strategy be for this particular business? How should they compete in order to win in the marketplace? What is the market going to look like 5 years from now? And how do we position ourselves for success in this industry? So there's several strategy consulting firms that kind of focused on those issues, those types of problems. McKinsey was one of those. So, I started out as an analyst, right? You're straight out of school, and basically, you know, as an analyst, you're doing a lot of the modeling work, a lot of the spreadsheet work, crunching the numbers to try to model out what a strategy or a scenario looks like. So that's what I did right out of undergraduate. You're helping put together presentations, some of the documents that, are presented to senior management. If you're lucky, sometimes you get to sit in on those meetings and see what goes on in the boardroom, which is always fun. After business school, there's a little bit more of that, but they give you larger portions of the project to work on. And ultimately, then you start leading teams that are managing, the problem solving effort and engagement. You're basically a project manager and overseeing a bunch of different, analysts and associates that are working on one of those projects, and typically spending a lot more time then with the senior executives in talking about, what you're learning, what your research is, insights are being provided from your research, and what you think the company should do, focusing on recommendations. So that's what the job entailed. Kind of projects would last 4 to 6 months. So, every 4 to 6 months, you'd be kind of parachute into a new company, a new problem, new people to work with, a new team. And, you kind of start from scratch, and, have to solve another problem, in a pretty short period of time. So it was a great way to start a career. You talk about constantly putting yourself into new situations where you have to learn very rapidly. You have to build relationships with people very quickly, establish trust with folks very quickly, and ultimately come up with a set of recommendations to help, address the question they're trying to answer. So great, great, great experience early on in my career. So McKinsey was just fantastic. I can't say enough good things about the people there, about the experience it provided me at an early age.
all right. So from that, you're married 8 years after being a consultant. Now, did you have any kids at the time? Was your daughter born?
Let's see, I'm trying to think. We did not start a family until after I had a couple of years after I had left McKinsey. So McKinsey's really demanding in terms of it can be really demanding in terms of travel, because I was based in Atlanta at the time, in the Atlanta office, but most of the projects that I was staffed on were elsewhere. So, I'd wake up, catch a flight Monday morning or Sunday night, and then, be on site with the client until Thursday evening, typically, and then come home. So, I was home for 3 days,
That's fun.
nonstop for a few years. So, and that's not long after my wife and I got married. So that's a tough lifestyle. It wasn't for us, which is why I decided to do something else. I enjoyed the work. I enjoyed the challenge. I loved working with the senior team where you can really have an impact on a business. But, I wanted something where the lifestyle and the travel was a little more manageable.
So the conversation with your wife was not a difficult one that we want to start our own business when you started the home improvement business, correct?
Well,
Or was it scary?
it was definitely scary. So, I left McKinsey and then I had worked at Home Depot for almost 8 years, and great experience there too. It really was kind of what I would was hoping for, in that I was working on big, tough problems with senior levels of the organization. I wasn't having to travel nearly as much as I was when I was in consulting, but I just kind of got the itch to do something else. The culture of the place had changed. The original founders of Home Depot had moved on, and there was some new leadership there that was kind of changing the culture, and it was becoming a little less entrepreneurial. It just wasn't quite as fun to work there. And I was at a stage in my career where I had saved up some money. I'd always had this idea in the back of my mind that I wanted to try to start my own thing. I wasn't unhappy at Home Depot, but I just kind of felt like now was the time to do something else. And, so I decided to do it, but it did take some arm twisting and negotiations with my wife, because she was happy in Atlanta. Our kids were young. We kind of felt like now was the time to do it before they got into school and having to uproot them. They were young enough where they wouldn't really remember living in Atlanta. And, I had wanted to get back out to Colorado. So we felt like there was a window of time before they started school, and we would have to move them. So that's kind of what led to it. And, we decided to move, across the country back to Colorado and start something on my own, which was also, another wonderful, unique experience, f- with came along with it with, all kinds of ups and downs and highs and lows and new learnings. And for me and my wife. So just a very different experience than consulting or working for a big company. But it was a great stop in my career for sure.
So let me ask you, there's a kid right now, I say kid, in his mid 30s, or someone in their mid 40s, or maybe even mid 50s, not too crazy about that company, so called owning them. What would your advice be to someone who says, I want to have my own business? What's the first step? Raise a bunch of capital? Do I take a second mortgage to get the money myself? Or give me a couple bullet points in your experience that somebody should think about doing before they decide to run their own show.
Yeah. Everybody's situation's different. So I think it's really hard to give generic advice, go do it because it's your passion or whatever. I mean, I think everybody's situation is very, very different. Family situation's different. Their financial situation's different. Their experiences that they have is different. And all of those things can make it easier or harder or risky or less risky to go out on your own. What I will say is there's a lot that I didn't know. It was harder than I thought it was going to be. It took more work than I thought it was going to take, despite, you know, my experiences at one of the best management consulting firms and, a really wonderful experience at a company like Home Depot that was very entrepreneurial, and, an education at, one of the best business schools in the world. It's different. There's a lot that you just can't learn, from school. Starting a small business is risky. Fortunately for me, it worked out, but it doesn't always work that way. But I think you got to look inside yourself and say, hey, do I really want to do this? Do I have the time and energy to really make a go of this. And it is to make it successful, it's probably going to have to be front and center in your life for a while. It's really tough to balance other things, your own interests, your sometimes your family, when you're trying to make payroll. It's a whole different pressure than working for a company where you got a steady paycheck and your
Yeah,
life
sure.
savings is at stake. So you got to think about that. You've got to think about what, you're thinking about the upside, what can happen, how great it can be is easy, but you also have to be realistic and think about what could go wrong here. And if it does, how am I going to deal with that? How am I going to get myself out of it? You have to be honest with your family and what the commitment's going to take and some of the sacrifices they'll have to make. I mean, I walked away from a really good paying job at Home Depot and a steady paycheck to one that, we didn't know if it was going to work. So, we had to make sacrifices and pull back on things and spend, well below our means and what we had been accustomed to living on. You know, um, I'm glad I did it. It worked out for me. I don't know how I feel, what I'd be saying right now if it didn't. It would have been a great learning experience, no question about it. But I don't know. I'm sure I would have a little more sour taste in my mouth than I do about my experience there. Um, I've seen friends that have had incredibly successful businesses, way beyond what I ever, the success I ever saw from my own, who now are wrestling with a whole different challenge. They've got all the money in the world and, you know, fame in some cases, connections, access to people, and they're just not happy. They're stuck in the business. Or they can't find a way to exit so that they can enjoy the fruits of their hard work over the course of their career. Trying to monetize the business isn't always easy. Trying to get out of it and sell it sometimes can be challenging. So, there's a lot to think about for sure if you're going to go down that path. It can be very rewarding. One of the best times of my life. Never worked harder, but you know, it was also, there's nothing like being your own boss, and it's unique. It's very unique, and it was a wonderful experience. I don't know that my wife would say the same thing. I was never around. For her, it wasn't so fun, but you know, for me, it was. I'm glad I did it.
You took your shot. I had a wise man tell me one time, it's scary, but isn't that what makes life exciting?
Yeah, for sure. Had I not done it, I would be looking back at my career with regrets. With regrets. So glad I did it.
That's awesome. Well, I remember I talked to my dad years ago when I was in the corporate world for a brief time about this casual Friday thing. And I said, well, that's kind of cool. Our company doesn't let us do it, blah, blah, blah. And my dad mentioned, are you more focused at work when you're wearing a suit and tie on a Monday morning? Or are you thinking about the golf course when you're just wearing a polo shirt on Friday afternoon? I thought that was interesting. And now it seems like everything's casual. But I was talking to a client and he told me he was taking a lesson on a Monday afternoon. He said, I asked him if he had the day off and he said he had UTO. And I said, what's UTO? And he said, we've got unlimited time off. I said, what the heck is that? And because when I was in the corporate world, you had so many weeks off that, based on seniority. And he went into all these other things that corporations are doing now. For instance, they have a quiet room that if you're too stressed out, you can go to a quiet room. And then his wife said, what are you talking about? And he said, well, you have to first watch this meditation video and breathing. And it's like a safe space. And it's like you're a kindergartner, like you bring your yoga mat and sleep on it. It was just, some of these things in the corporate world changed. How did what you were taught, hard nosed driving guy at college and then Harvard Business School, what were some of the challenges that you faced basically dealing with employees when you were a business owner?
you know, you see it all, and I went through some of it too. I mean, there were times when, I had family stuff going on that was a distraction. I had times when I wasn't feeling great, when I was stressed out and wasn't able to perform at a level that I knew I was capable of because I was just, felt overwhelmed or felt anxious about stuff. Um, so I completely understand and have empathy for folks that are going through that. And, I think, me as a leader of a business, whether it be my own or whether it had been, me leading a large, in a chief operating officer role at a bigger company, if it's a good employee, somebody who has, a hard worker, who's loyal, who's, I feel like, earned, you know, who's somebody you want to keep around and you want to take care of, you find a way to help those people through the rough spots that everybody goes through in life. But, there are also people who their entire life is a rough spot. And at some point, they've got to figure out, it's not your problem to help them figure that out. At some point, they need to go figure it out. And, you know, the job they have with you may not be the right fit for them. And they need to go figure it out. Because it has a toxic effect on a lot of other people too. People see what, culture is what you tolerate. Culture in a company is what you tolerate. And if you're tolerating behavior where nobody's doing work and everybody's, you know, in the quiet room with their heads down, uh, you know, you're not going to have a business. You got a
Yeah.
business to run. And, at some point, you have to figure out where to draw that line somewhere. So my feeling is it's tough. It's really tough to deal with those types of challenges. But if you've got a really good employee who's, got a legitimate issue that they're working through and, they're really working on it and what they're capable of, you help them out, of course. But, you got to find, there are situations where that's not the case, where somebody's just there to honestly take advantage of you. And, those are people that you can't allow your culture in an organization, to tolerate. They've got to go find somewhere else that's a better fit for them. And they're tough to deal with, because you're dealing with a human being. But,
Right.
there's that, there's all kinds of stuff. There's, people who have big egos. There's people who don't treat others, colleagues well, who are trying to get ahead. You see it all. And, it's about setting expectations. It's about being clear about what's expected of them and what is not tolerable and, you know, then acting on it. Because as I mentioned, culture is a function of what you tolerate, no matter what you say, right? You can talk about it all day long, but if you're tolerating it and it's different than what you're saying, it's what you tolerate
Yeah.
that forges the culture. So, that was always kind of how I thought about it and how I dealt with it. And
Right.
those are the toughest situations, but sometimes the hardest part is deciding what to do once you make a decision about an individual and move on.
Mhm.
If that's what your decision is, things get much better. If you're finding that 80% of your time is focused on, one or two people, you usually have the answer of what you need to do.
Right. Because everybody's watching.
Yeah, for sure. Oh yeah, no question.
Yeah.
People know they know what's going on.
Yeah.
They know
Well,
more than you do.
it's like kids.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, I want to throw some, I got to be, oh, considerate of your time here. And we appreciate all your time you've given us and advice. I want to throw some fastballs at you. You're back at third base. Now you're at the plate. I'm going to throw you some fastballs before we wrap up. So,
All right, I'll see if I can handle it.
all right, here comes a four seamer. What would be the number one quality a CEO or business owner needs to have? Maybe you've just talked about it.
Oh, gosh, I think a CEO or owner, you have to be, I mean, it requires so much. But I think one of the things that's really important, you have to be completely comfortable with being uncomfortable. So you have to be, you're making decisions all the time when you don't know, you don't have full information, you don't have full context. A lot of times you've got imperfect information. You you don't know. You're under time pressure. You don't have the time to do fully research a decision, but you have to act. So you're constantly in a leadership position uncomfortable, and you got to get comfortable with that. The business changes, you're under time pressure. So I think that's one of the most important things that you have to be able to deal with as a senior leader in any organization is getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. And the more you can practice that throughout your career, putting yourself in those types of situations, if you want to be a senior leader someday, you know, find ways to practice that, to get experience doing that. If you're comfortable in your job, you're not growing, you're not learning, you need to find a way to make yourself uncomfortable.
I like that. You're growing. So, how do we make kids tougher and more resilient these days? You're a dad, you've been a business owner, you've high competitive athlete, adversity, being resilient. What do we do to make kids tougher these days?
Well, the advice I give my own kids is just that. I mean, I try to reinforce that. Like, the best way for you to learn and grow is when you're uncomfortable, not so much so that it's debilitating, but if you're getting comfortable, you need to find some way to challenge yourself, take on more, take on a new project, ask for a different role in the company, do something, learn a new skill, try something different at work. It can be socially too, I mean, go out and find a way to give a talk in front of a bunch of people if you've never done it before. You know, put yourself in these situations that are lower risk, but are going to stretch and challenge you. I think that's advice that I've given, my kids, and I give to other, younger folks that I mentor. Expect adversity and embrace it. Don't back down from a tough challenge. Take it on. It's a learning experience. Struggling is part of the learning process. Um, and practicing resiliency will get you ready for all of the discomforts that life will inevitably throw you in your personal life, in your work life. It's going to happen. So the more you're used to it, the more you've dealt with it, I think the more practice you have, the better you'll be able to deal with it in the future. The other thing that has frustrated me as a parent, with my kids growing up, there's so much pressure on them to get good grades, right? Grades are the measure of success, and kids share grades, what they're getting in college in high school on social media. And like, that's the worst thing you can do. Get grades is not the only way to measure what you're learning. Uh, you know, a lot of times the best way to learn is to, take a class that's really, really hard. It's something that you don't know much about. And, you may not get a great grade, but, I guarantee you're going to learn something. So, I've encouraged them, especially when they were in college, don't focus as much on what your GPA is. Focus on challenging yourself, learning. You'll have to explain that, if you don't get a good grade in an interview, why your GPA could have been higher. But you know what? I mean, I think that's a great story for people to hear, for employers to hear. I love it when people come into, would interview with me and we talk about, how they did in school and why they took the classes they took and, how they really pushed and challenged themselves. I love that. That's what you want to see as an employer, that somebody doesn't back down from a challenge and is willing to try new things and is willing to learn and can push themselves. That, I think, is far more valuable in life than taking a set of classes where you can get
Slam
good
dunk it,
grades.
right? Yeah. I think that's awesome. Well, all right. These are a little bit easier, a little slower fastballs. Who's your all time favorite sports team?
All-time favorite sports team?
Yeah. Or you could say the greatest sports team of all time is.
Well, I grew up outside of Chicago, and when I was there, we had a couple of really great sports teams. So, we had the '86 Bears that won the Super Bowl with Jim McMahon and Refrigerator Perry and that gang.
You saw
So
the defense they had. Yeah.
that was excuse me. So that was the Bears had always been pretty awful growing up. So having them win the Super Bowl and all the hype around that was super fun at that time of my life. And then of course the Bulls with Jordan, and the years he was there was so much fun to watch.
They did
As
okay.
they did okay. They did okay.
So who's your favorite athlete of all time?
Well, I'm going to come back to tennis there. Um, and I've got a couple of people that I admire for different reasons. I mean, Roger Federer, hard to argue with him just because of being a terrific, unbelievable athlete in what he was able to accomplish, and just a classy person, a great competitor, a great role model. So he is certainly high on the list. Rafa Nadal, for the competitor that he is, the fighter that he is, how he made himself better so that he could try to win championships from despite Roger Federer, amazing. And then Novak Djokovic, I respect him as a competitor for similar reasons. A fighter, I'm not as big on him as a person, a little bit of an ego, but it's hard to argue with him at his age what he is still able to do, and the competitive spirit, the work ethic, just kind of the mental strength that he has to be doing what he's still doing today. Those three guys being so dominant in tennis for so long, I think it's just been something really special to witness. So I admire all three of those guys for sure.
And Roger always patterned his game after your one hand backhand, I heard. Is that true?
I don't know if you've seen you saw my one-handed backhand. Yeah, that is not anything to model anything after other than don't do this.
It kept you in the point. Don't kid yourself. All right. What's your favorite book of all time?
Favorite book. Oh gosh. This is one thing I'm embarrassed to say. Like, I am not a reader. I am not a reader. And my memory is awful. I honestly, I don't know that I have one book that I can mention as this is one thing that has completely transformed my life.
That's okay. You're a sponge. You learn from people. That works.
Yeah. I tell you what I do have though. And I could send it to you if you're interested. But what I over the course of my career and life, so I have read books. It's not that I don't read, and you can see some, in my behind me here. But what I did start doing was jotting down kind of little nuggets from things that I read that, could have been seen it in the paper, it could have been a book, or it could have been a podcast, or it could have been something. But some little tidbit that I took away from every interaction that I had that I thought was compelling. And I used to just keep it on a notebook, and there were quotes, there were thoughts. And anyway, a couple of years ago, I took the time to kind of go through that and think about it and kind of group them into different themes. And ultimately what came out of it, I wasn't sure if there was going to be anything interesting that came out of it, but it was really interesting. There's probably, I don't know, 10 themes. And as I sat back and did this and looked at it, they're kind of the way that I have lived my life. They kind of reflect my values in the way that I have tried to pattern my life. And, ultimately, it was interesting to me. So I shared it with my kids because I thought they would get value out of it, and shared it with some other folks. And it's, the feedback I got from it was, was real positive. So it is literally a compilation of many things that I've read over the course of my career, but I still look at it a lot. And kids who usually don't listen to a lot of what I have to say, he actually printed it out and put it on his bulletin board, and
Nice.
he looks at it every day. So
How about that?
maybe there's something there, but
Right.
I'm happy to send it to you.
Yeah. And I'd love to check that out. And this your answer might be, that might be the answer to the very last question I have. Not that looking back and fixing things, because we know we can't. We can just learn from the past. But is there any advice that you'd give a young 25-year-old Tim Kulik? Say, hey, do this instead of that.
Yeah, I think take more chances, take some more risk. Things have worked out for me just fine, but I've always been pretty conservative because I've always had, I think, a little bit of an unhealthy fear of failure. And um, I think that was something that constrained me. I was always worried about not succeeding. And, I wish I had um, a little more courage to take more risks and try some things earlier in my life than I did, than always taking kind of a more safer route. So don't be reckless. I'm not saying be reckless, have courage in yourself, have faith in yourself, you know, take action. What you accomplish is in direct proportion to what you attempt, and, aim high, shoot for the moon,
Well, that's
take
awesome.
some risks, take some chances.
Well, I've got a nice full thing here of notes that I learned from you, which I appreciate. A couple things. This guy, Tim Kulik, he had a walk-off home run as a kid. We'll always remember that. Sports, he talked about sports, how winning and losing and everything about sports, it's a game, but we learn through sports. We want to create our own luck through hard work. I like that your coach said you had to prove yourself, and you did. I thought that was great that you mentioned that you learned from older teammates and other players on the team. Again, you mentioned your hard work in the classroom. Success breeds success. We need to set the bar higher. Owning your own business, it's harder, more work than you expected. And I'm sure there's a lot of great rewards at the end of that too. I love this one. Culture is what you tolerate. Being comfortable with being uncomfortable. That is a challenge for everybody. And we grow when we're uncomfortable. Challenge yourself. I like this one. Try a new skill. Expect adversity and embrace it. And the way you wrapped it up about taking more chances. So I know Tim Kulik's personally going to be rushing the net more often, taking a few more chances. Tim, I really appreciate your time, man. And I know you're an awesome guy, but man, I really appreciate some of the insights you gave us and your time today.
Well, it's been fun chatting with you. It's been fun reliving some memories that I haven't thought about in a long time from my youth. I'm excited for you and what you're doing with this, and anxious to hear some of your future episodes. And yeah, just looking forward to seeing you again in person.
Well, again, thank you, Tim. I appreciate your time. And for everybody else, remember, make the most of your time and always hang tough. Have a great day.
You too.